So welcome to our session. Our session's on forests beyond trees. And my name's Lauren Code. I'm a senior scientist at C4 ICRAF, and I work on sustainable use of world species. And I'm here with our lovely speakers today to convince you that forests are more than just carbon sticks. As we'll hear from our speakers, wild species from mushrooms and fruits and nuts and wild meat generate enormous economic, social and health benefits, especially for communities in tropical forests. And each year, research documents new ways that forest ecosystems are benefiting people. But our challenge is to work out how can we use this research to generate useful ways of sustainably managing our wild species. So we know that from the 1970s onwards, we've lost about 70% of our mammal populations. But we're not here to document the decline with our presentations. We're here to think about solutions. And our speakers are going to highlight some of the strategies that are being developed to support sustainable, equitable, and safe use of forest ecosystems. So they're talking about sustainable wildlife management, nature finance. They're looking at new ways of harnessing traditional knowledge and how to use genetic sequencing and AI technologies. And I know we've got a session tomorrow on AI. And our speakers today come from a range of countries and institutions, but they're all focused on finding sustainable ways to manage biodiversity that focus on use, so use it or lose it. Many of them are also part of our new Transformative partnership platform on sustainable use of wild species that we've just set up at C4 ICRAF. So the SU-TPP is a coalition of partners that's dedicated to generating evidence and tools that people can use to sustainably manage wild species. So please do visit our landing page. I think Daniela, who's our wonderful comms person, has put the link online. And we've also got a session platform where you can get all the information on the SU-TPP. Oh, and I've got a slider. So I'm going to, first of all, introduce you quickly to our speakers. Please. We've got speakers online and we've got speakers in person, so please come up on stage with me. So we've got Amy Ickowitz, who's a senior scientist at C4 ICRAF, and her research focuses on poverty, food insecurity, malnutrition, and links between all of these and the natural environment. Online, we have Shun Hongo. Have we got an online, of our people online yet? I'm going to think that's a yes. He's an associate professor. There we are, there's Shun. Hello. He's an associate professor at the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature in Kyoto, and Shun's research investigates how local knowledge can be used to develop wildlife management models in tropical rainforests. Online as well, we have Chrissy Durkin, who's the CRO of Map of Life, which is a biodiversity intelligence company that aims to provide near real-time insights into species distributions and biodiversity trends. In person with us, we have Nayara Salas. Have I got that right? Yay! Who's a lecturer at the University of Salford in the United Kingdom, and her research uses novel genetic and genomics techniques for biodiversity and health assessments. And last but not least, we have Lola Nyot, who's a legal practitioner at FAO and focusing on policy development, capacity building, and community management for international forestry and wildlife sectors. So please give a round of applause for our wonderful speakers. So Amy's going to kick off our session today by giving us an overview of what we know and what we don't know about forests and wild foods. But before she does, we've decided that because we have the session before lunch and we need to keep you all awake, we're also going to bring you into thinking about forests and wild foods. And so before each talk, we've got a Slido and a set of questions to get you all thinking. So if we can get that Slido up again. Great. So people in the room, you probably use this. We're all used to Slidos from wonderful COVID. But basically, if you point your phones at that, we're going to have some questions for you guys just before each presentation. So our first question is, what percentage of the rural Zambian population harvests wild food? Is it 10%, 25, 50, or 90? And to answer that question and give our first presentation, Amy's going to come and talk to us about wild foods.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to listen to our talks today. And yeah. Great. So I'm going to be starting us off on talking about what we know about forests and wild food and what we don't know, and how we're trying to fill in those gaps of what we don't know. Okay, so what do we know about forests and wild foods? We know that billions of people around the world consume foods from forests. We know that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of case studies showing the importance of wild foods in many different contexts in very specific locations. And we know that wild foods contribute to nutrition and to income. What don't we know? We don't know how much forest foods are collected pretty much anywhere in the world. So we know that people collect them and that they consume them, but we don't know how much they collect and consume, except in small case studies. And we don't know a lot about the species that are collected. And besides even the scientific information of identifying them, we don't know what their nutrient profiles are, so how much they actually contribute to diets. And putting those two things together, we don't know how much these foods actually contribute to food security and nutrition or to incomes, except again, in some very specific locations. So, why is it important that we know what we don't know? So, what often happens in the real world, even though I think this upsets a lot of people, is that if you don't put a number on something when it comes to policy, the default value is 0. So that means policymakers don't really know how to account for something if they don't know how much they're talking about. So even policymakers that think that forest foods might be important, they don't know how much forest foods are coming from their countries, where they're coming from, and what's actually there. It's very hard for them to make policy decisions that would take those into account. And therefore, we can't sustainably manage what we don't know about. And then on the sort of more narrative side of things, there's a narrative that we often hear that forests are great and important, but we have a food crisis, and so although it's sad, we need to sacrifice forests in order to produce more food. So that's a very common narrative. And there's a counter narrative, of course, that's more complicated than I'm going to really talk about today, but at least at a minimum, if we're able to show, well, how much wild foods would we be sacrificing if we cut forests to produce more maize or more rice, we'd have a lot more traction in our counter narrative. So it's also important for sort of like the policy talk. You can see I'm not very competent with. Okay. It's not just me, or maybe it is. Okay. Okay. So we, in our research, decided to start somewhere in trying to fill in these gaps, and C4ICRAF partnered with the Zambia Statistics Agency and the Zambia Forestry Department to carry out the first nationally representative survey of wild food collection and consumption. And one important point that I want to make, which is relevant for the rest of the talks, is that it did not include wild meat. And we can talk about that later if people want to ask questions about that. So just some teasers of some key findings from the survey. We found, here's the answer to the question, 90% of rural households in Zambia collected and consumed wild foods. We were able to scientifically identify 248 unique foods that people had collected in the year of the survey, and there are still 98 foods that we have not been able to identify, so they might just be different names for the same foods, or they might be different foods. And in collecting these foods and consuming them, the average Zambian saved somewhere between $400 and $900 in that year by collecting wild foods. So those are not foods that they sold, those are the value of the foods that they consumed using like the cheapest alternative product that they would have had to buy. And just for reference, the gross national income per capita in Zambia in that year was about $1,000. So that is a huge savings. So the idea is that we're able to show that it is difficult. I didn't show you how difficult, but it is difficult to collect this kind of national data. But it's not impossible, which is sort of the attitude that people had had before because it is so complicated. But it's really not so complicated that you can't do it. And the results of the data show that forest collection is widespread throughout the country. It's not just a marginal thing that a lot of times if you read case studies, you figure, okay, it's important in that community, but that doesn't mean that it's important overall for a country. So the data actually show it is widespread across the country, and there are different products that are more important in different regions. And I haven't shown you the results, but there's also, they make a huge contribution to nutrition and food security besides their economic importance. And so that knowing what is collected, how much is collected, and where those foods are collected is a very important step towards designing policies to sustainably manage these foods. And that's kind of the theme of our talks today about how to sustainably manage these foods. So the point that we're making right now is just that, first of all, we need to know what is actually there and what are people actually using. Thank you very much.
Is that working? Oh yeah, there we go. Thanks so much, Amy. So we're going to move on to our next talk, which is online with Shun Hongo in a minute. We've got another Slido question before then, but I don't have the Slido question written down. So who has the Slido on their phone that can tell me who the question? Oh, there we go, brilliant. So what are the benefits of including indigenous and local knowledge in forest hunting regulations? So this is an open question, and we just want to see, like, what do people think are the benefits? We'll just have a quick moment to see what comes up here. So no pressure. You can't listen to the next talk until I get something on this screen, if it's working. Is it working? Who's written something and it hasn't come up? Oh, there we go, brilliant. So we have better data, ownership, generational experience, more effective policies, social justice, hunting rights species. Yeah. Brilliant. Climate history, yeah. So, so this feeds in brilliantly to Shun's presentation, which is going to look at towards sustainable hunting in tropical rainforests, especially bridging the gap between science and indigenous and local knowledge. So is Shun online for his presentation?
Okay, so my name is Shun Hongo from Japan. I'm working in Research Institute for Humanity and Nature and Kyoto University. I'm working in mostly Central Africa countries for sustainable wildlife hunting. So wild meat hunting is an essential topic where biodiversity meets cultural diversity. As Amy pointed out, of course, wild meat is essential for local people in tropical rainforests as a main resource of protein and income, but it is also important culturally. The wild hunting and wild meat use, including wild meat sharing between families and within families. These activities play a vital role in the creation and transmission of locally rooted knowledge, cultural practices, and worldviews. So the simple ban of wild meat hunting is not a comprehensive solution for this problem. But it is also true that hunting leads to reduction and extermination of wildlife population. So what we should ask now is the hunting by local people is always a conservation threat? Or we can hypothesize if it can be transformed into an essential component of wildlife conservation if scientists and local people can cooperate on equal footing. So I, with my colleagues, are working for this goal, hunting for fair and sustainable use. The key approach is harvest-based monitoring, which means monitors wildlife population trends using local harvest data from indigenous and local community. So this harvest-based monitoring concept is not really new and surprising because we have plenty of examples from Arctic, such as Inuit people, but there are no successful examples in the tropics so far. So we are now exploring a good indicator to achieve this goal, the harvest-based monitoring. One example is RB ratio. RB ratio is red duiker, blue duiker ratio. Duikers are one of the main hunting targets in Central African people. So this is example from Southeast Cameroon. So this is a simple indicator calculated by dividing number of red duikers divided by number of blue duikers, catch ratio. So this simple indicator can predict the total amount of hunting resources because we now see in this graph with the increase in this RB ratio, the total amount of wild meat biomass also increased. This clear correlation means the good predictor for the amount of hunting resources. So this indicator was found with the interaction between anthropologists, ecologists, and local people Baka in Southeast Cameroon. So this indicator is also relevant to local people knowledge. So now we have started a new project of the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature to expand this activity to not only Africa, but also Latin's project Fashilox. Our objective is to aim for an environmentally and culturally compatible solution to the wild meat problem. And key approaches is to establish locally based hunting models in the rainforest regions and promote equal dialogue and knowledge co-production between researchers, conservation officers, and local people. So we share these objectives in key approaches in our 5 sites, Cameroon, Colombia, Gabon, DR Congo, Borneo. But the knowledge co-production activity will be done in site specifically. So we will have different 5 strategies in the end of our project period. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shen. So we have another question for you to keep you on your toes. Do we have the Slido up? So our next question is, how much of the global GDP could be at risk as a result of businesses' dependence on nature and its services? So you've got it's a multiple choice. You can choose 44 trillion, 12 million, 1.3 billion, or 89 million. So those are all quite random. To give you the answer to that one, we have Chrissy Durkin, who's going to talk to us about how we map and measure biodiversity. I'm interested to see from the Slido what people's ideas of that one are. I don't know if we can see it or not before Chrissy starts. Did the Slido not go up?
No, it's up. Let's see.
Let's go on to Chrissy, who can tell us the answer anyway. Chrissy, can you hear us?
Well, everyone was correct. So people here know their stats. The answer, yes, is $44 trillion, which is at risk because our economies depend so heavily on nature and its services. So that's quite a staggering number, yet we're really only still scratching the surface of the true value of biodiversity. And if we do want to protect nature in our economies, and also just direct investment where it really matters, we really need transparent, reliable, and ongoing data about what's really happening on the ground. So it's really wonderful to be here with you all. I'm Chrissy Durkin. I'm the CRO of Map of Life. Today, I'll share just a little bit quickly about how scalable biodiversity monitoring is helping us properly value nature, unlock new opportunities like biodiversity credits, and create a better baseline for the value of forests. Biodiversity is vast and complex, which has made it hard to measure and even harder to value thus far. So at Map of Life, we're working really hard to change that by combining sort of all of our global species data that exists with advanced modeling and analytics. So essentially working to turn what right now is a lot of scattered biodiversity data into clear and actionable insights. So this approach integrates quite massive data sets from species occurrences and taxonomic frameworks to environmental and trait data. And then we use this information to build habitat suitability models and species distribution models, essentially high resolution predictions of where species live and how they're faring, spanning pretty much all taxonomic groups. From there, we can generate clear indicators and metrics that inform everything from national biodiversity reporting to conservation investments, and as well to the new frontier of biodiversity credits. So our work is quite global, but any work is really only as strong as the local partnerships that power it. So for example, with our partnership with C4ICRAF, we're excited to be working to put the power of these tools into the hands of communities across 5 countries. And my hope is if we can make it more cost effective to leverage this data, better inform what additional data needs to be collected in more tailored ways, and enable communities to execute on the process from start to finish, we can support the creation of new nature positive, sustainable livelihood opportunities. Let's zoom in to part of Region 9 in Guyana, the Kanuku Mountains, where part of this project is happening. So within our system, because of all of this intensive scientific work and modeling, we're able to automatically generate a list of expected species for this area. So we can look at which species are particularly important to monitor due to conservation status or lack of existing data. And that can really help to prioritize additional data collection. So to zoom in even further, I kind of just chose a species at random, and the sun parakeet is just so colorful. This is an endangered species that occurs in this region. So whether it's as part of a framework, because of community priorities, or to make management decisions, this might be one example of a species that we could use predictive models to help prioritize further monitoring and validation of if it occurs. And luckily, the sun parakeet has a really specific vocalization. So, for example, you can use acoustic monitoring to capture and validate the presence of this species locally. Now, to zoom back out a little bit, if you think about that as an example, we can then apply that approach to all species in a region of interest combined, enabling you to optimize and prioritize both the key species of interest and the best data type to use to sample an area. So we're doing this with C4ICRAF and communities in Guyana, in addition to those other countries, spanning collecting acoustic data, camera trap information, eDNA samples from water, additionally traditional knowledge in transects, and all of that is in an effort to really understand how can we optimize data collection approaches, create them in more scalable, more cost-effective ways to enable opportunities like biodiversity crediting frameworks. So the key here is really putting these tools into the hands of the people who can make use of them to own, manage, and create value from their own landscapes powered by their own data. So in partnership with Wildmon, we undertook trainings just a few weeks ago with community members on how to deploy acoustic recorders, camera traps, take eDNA samples, and collect this data themselves. And then all of this is in the effort to go sort of one step further in unlocking real value, which requires metrics that are credible, transparent, easy to use. So part of our efforts and what we have done is creating GBF adopted indicators to measure, for example, how well a species habitat is represented in protected areas, and therefore sort of how important it is to protect it in additional areas, how habitat changes year over year, and how much data we have for each species in a region of interest. So our goal beyond that is to really make it simple to leverage market mechanisms to make biodiversity positive action profitable for people directly interacting with nature. So we're super excited about this path and collaboration across stakeholders to make hopefully that a reality. Thank you for your time here today. I'm super keen to help build bridges and collaboration. So of course, please feel free to reach out, and back over to the team there locally.
Thanks so much, Chrissy. And just to say that we are going through very speedy presentations today because we want to have a bit of a chat at the end of our session. But Chrissy's available online, and we've got our speakers here today and tomorrow. So we're really looking forward to chatting to you a bit more about all of these things in a bit more detail. So we're going on to our next Slido question, which is, how could novel portable DNA sequencing tools revolutionize work in forested or remote environments? So this is another question for you guys. So what do you think is the sort of most important use? And just to remind you that if you don't answer this question, you don't get lunch. So quite a lot of votes for monitoring biodiversity, less for reducing reliance on centralised labs. So again, to answer our question for us, we have Nayara Salas, who's going to be presenting on Beyond the Trees using novel sequencing technologies to reveal hidden biodiversity in wild meat and environmental samples. So please go ahead.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and briefly talk about how we can use some of these novel sequencing technologies to review biodiversity from wild meat and also from environmental samples. So as we know, forests, they are complex ecosystems with interconnected species, including those that are harvested for food. And what is important to note is that these forests, they harbor a web of life, including animals and microorganisms. And these also interact with each other. So when we think about these animals, we also need to think about their gut bacteria, their pathogens, and also their parasites. And what we've been seeing is that with the increase of anthropogenic actions, and for example, also the increase in wildlife trade, we have been seeing an increased interaction between these animals and different microorganisms. As an example, trade and markets, they create some new mixing grounds in which we have some pathogens from particular species getting in close contact with species that they would not commonly get in close contact in the wild. Because of that, we also see an increase of the risk of zoonotic disease spillover. And that's why we need to have better surveillance and also species identification methods. In this context, sequencing can help us a lot because sequencing the DNA can let us track these invisible interactions. As an example, we can use these portable sequencers to conduct some real-time genomic investigations. So for example, we can use these sequencers to detect the presence of some emerging pathogens and also the presence of zoonotic diseases. Some of these sequencers, they are so small that they are actually a little bit bigger than this clicker here. And because of that, they allow us to do this real-time sequencing, and they also allow us to establish some in situ labs, meaning labs in the forest. And because of that, we can also have an increased capacity building. So in a summary, what we plan to do, what we've been doing, is that we are collecting biological and environmental samples. So for example, samples directly collected from animals or samples collected from the environment, such as water and soil. We isolate the DNA that can be detected from these samples, and we sequence this DNA. And what we aim to see is that we aim to review this hidden biodiversity, such as in this case, from one sample revealing different groups of bacteria detected from an animal, including those that might be pathogens as well and might represent a risk. As an example, I have here today to mention two projects that we are conducting in collaboration with C4, in which we are using these different sequencing technologies as a toolkit to actually provide a full snapshot. So pretty much trying to understand who's there and what are they carrying. So what are the animals being traded and what are these animals carrying as well. In the first example, we've collected samples in the DRC from wildlife markets, and we also collected both meat samples as well. And our aim is now to review what are the traded species, so detect the traded species, detect what species we can detect from environmental samples, so species that have been potentially traded in the market but we cannot identify in a visit. But also we are very interested in revealing the associated bacterial microbiome. So what bacteria can we detect from these samples? And are there some potential pathogens that can be detected using this DNA sequencing? And in the second example I brought here to mention today is the investigation that we are conducting in Brazil to try to understand a potential zoonotic transmission of Mycobacterium leprae between armadillos and humans in Brazil. In the US, where leprosy is not considered an endemic disease, it's already well understood that there is a zoonotic transmission of Mycobacterium leprae between humans and these armadillos. In contrast to that, Brazil, that is an endemic country with the second highest number of cases of leprosy worldwide, this has not been well established yet. So we are going to collect samples and to compare the bacteria that is detected from humans and also these animals to try to review if there is a potential zoonotic transmission in this case. So in a nutshell, we can use these new DNA sequencing technologies to try to unveil some of these hidden risks. And what we expect to see in the next decade is that we expect to have these technologies being used to expand surveillance, to increase local capacity building by establishing these labs in remote locations, and also to establish some clear protocols, including real-time assessments of biodiversity and health, and focused in the Global South as well. So thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions as well, here's my contact information.
Thanks, Niara. So our presentation so far, I've looked at how much we know about wild foods, why wild foods are important, some of the different technologies and the different approaches we can use for sustainable management and sustainable use. But arguably, if we don't have the right legal frameworks and regulations for the sustainable use, it's going to be much harder to do it. So our last presentation is going to be looking at... oh, hang on a minute. We've got our Slido question. I forgot it. So we're going to ask you how many legal instruments, and by legal instruments we mean sort of laws and regulations related to biodiversity management, exist across all levels of governance in Congo Basin countries. What do we think? Well, I do know the answer to this one, and you're all so wrong. So please take it away, Lola.
Thank you all for coming, and it's going to be a bit different from the last presenters, but I hope you're going to stay with me about legal science. So my presentation will be about how we can value forest ecosystems through policy and legal reforms, and I'm going to present you what we are using in the Sustainable Wildlife Management Program to do this, and it's called the Legal Hub. So what is the Legal Hub? It's an online platform where you can find all sustainable wildlife management related laws. But what makes it different from like a classic database on legal text is that you can find also legal analysis done by legal experts in all the different countries where the program is working. And all the analysis are being validated by the government and by like national workshop where the civil society also participated. And what is also different is that the Legal Hub is really made to be accessible for all, meaning that we're not only providing like a legal profile for a country, but we provide different level of granularity in the information so that all different types of actors can access and understand the legal framework. So not only legal experts, but decision makers, civil society, all the stakeholders. We like to say that the Legal Hub is multi-level and multi-sectoral. Multi-level because we not just look at national legal framework, but also local norms and local rules. We do analyze also customary law, for instance, in the Congo Basin. It's also multi-sectoral because we not just look at wildlife law, but also land tenure, food safety, animal production, really a comprehensive analysis to reflect also the value chain approach and the One Health approach. The Legal Hub is really a key tool, not only to give access to information, but also to improve like policy and legal reforms. And I'm going to show you rapidly like how we can do this. So the Legal Hub has been widely appreciated in all the countries where we launched the platform. This is clear not only from testimonial we got from the different governments, but also from the statistics of the visits in the website. And the launch of the Legal Hub has acted in every country where we launched the hub as really a catalyst for change because it created a momentum, putting all the different ministries from the different sector around the same table, helping them to reflect on the priorities to ensure a sustainable management of wildlife. The Legal Hub, for instance, help us to inform not only legal, as I was mentioning, legal reforms, but also policy reforms. We are currently supporting the development of new wildlife policy in Madagascar, in DRC. In the Congo Basin, we've helped government transforming their legal framework. In the Congo, the wildlife law. In Gabon, implementing decrees on wildlife trade and on hunting regulation. And in Guyana, for instance, we are supporting the change of fisheries legislation or aquaculture regulation. So what I want to highlight really here is that having like this multi-sectoral analysis done helps to find multiple avenues for advancing sustainable wildlife management. When some process is maybe stuck or we don't know why, you can always find with the Legal Hub a new entry point to try to enforce new practices and to give like a good background. And maybe like the final point here is now we have different legal platforms for all the countries in different regions, so mainly in the Congo Basin, but also in the Kaza region now. We'd like to also help the different regional organizations use the Legal Hub to ensure like harmonization of the different national legal framework to help organizations and public donors to better like design their project and to have like solid baseline. And with this, I think I'm just going to wrap up. I have like a lot of information to share again, but I will be available the next days. And I've also left some very nice brochure at the entrance, so please take them. Thank you.
So this is working. This is working. Great. So we've actually run over our time. We haven't got any time for questions, but we are all around. We'll be in the area outside. We'll be around tomorrow as well. So please come up and just ask us anything you feel like. Very big thank you to all our speakers. Thanks for sharing all your knowledge with us today.